Well, his legacy is spread all over town in what he's left behind, in all the churches and residences and commercial buildings. To call him a Renaissance man doesn't even cover it. He's so multi-talented in so many different ways and works in so many different materials.
I was interested in everything, just everything. We went to a lot of museums downtown Cleveland. When I was about this big, my mother took us down there to do little art school class things. And pretty soon, you just get a whack for everything.
Harold Blaze is one of those people who knows how to use every single tool in the toolbox, and he might even have uses for it that you've never thought of, and neither did the manufacturer. Like a magical little elf making these beautiful sculptures that sort of look like language and sort of look like hieroglyphs. Harold made all of this. There's so much of it.
Yeah, it's just make stuff. I would never call myself an artist. If it's art, it's to be determined by someone else.
One of the things that I think is really clear to me is there wouldn't be a Harold without a Rosemary.
I think the fountain is great, and some of the bigger commissions that have gone out. And when you did the big enamel that went to the Kingdom, but everything is so different, because he works in so many mediums.
Watching Harold work, watching this man that's making art for decades, it's not just showing up and doing the work, just like any job, building a ship or building a house, it's building stuff. But then after every piece he finished, just the giddy childhood, he'd come to me and he'd like, oh, I think this is the best thing I've ever made. Whether it was a miniature or an enamel, it didn't matter.
One of my favorite pieces, and there are a lot of them here just within sight of where we're standing, is the floating sculpture.
I mean, the fact that somebody would make this giant thing that goes up and down as the flow of the river happens and moves with the current, also forms a little habitat where cormorants and ducks and other things kind of like hang out on it, which I think is so fabulous because it's sort of a cross between a catamaran, a tugboat, and a work of art.
Do you know the piece at the corner of the Opera House? It's sort of a big tower, goes 40 feet in the sky. I thought I'd done some of the best thing I ever done in the world. I didn't get to see that thing until the whole show was over almost. It was the last week. And so I went down to sit there and look at how many people. Out of 90 people, there were 80 who stopped to look at it. I hope that tells you something.
Harold was one of the very first people in Eastern Washington to get involved with working to create works of art through the State Arts Commission, which is now called ArtsWA, which was the Washington State Arts Commission. He was on the artist roster for many years. He helped work on creating public policy for the state around public art. I served with him on the Memorials Commission that looks at how to commemorate things at the state capitol.
I know for people my age, he made art not just accessible, but matter of fact. Like you didn't have to discuss whether we should have public funds for art, whether art makes the city nicer. It was just there, and you didn't really have to, it wasn't something you had to philosophically decide, but also just through the creativity. And growing up in Spokane, you see his pieces all over. And they're very accessible, visually as well as physically.
Look at history at all, there's not a piece of culture anyway in the world that hasn't indulged in art or some aspect of art.
I think that most of us would look to Harold as being a true leader for someone who would go out and really speak up on behalf of the artists. He professionalized the arts for a lot of this area in Eastern Washington where there hadn't been previously very many artists working either in public art or in commissioned sculpture work.
Harold is the grandfather of the arts in Spokane, and has been the most visual artist, I think, in town. He's been around for so long and has produced so many pieces that are just all over downtown.
He's so giving of his time, so he gave one person mentoring, who gave two people mentoring. It's an exponential growth, it would seem.
Everybody that's in this racket, if you just hid yourself away and didn't do any helping others out, it wouldn't amount to anything.
I think a really good way to talk about how Harold's work affects us is to talk about seeing a bunch of it together. He does things that are really tender and beautiful and observed. I love the way that it resonates and echoes nature, abstraction, and that kind of wacky energy that Harold has. The work is part of the face of the community.
This is a tearjerker. I did work on a synagogue in the coast, and it was being financed by a bunch of very old people who survived. We came down, and these people come down the aisle, and it was the first time we'd saw them. And almost to a person, they were crying. Not just the runny eye, they were crying. But that just knocked me over, to realize that you could do that, to touch someone's life to that extent.